Alrighty, let's get started. This is my talk, Creative Collaboration, how to work together to make something awesome. So first off, let me introduce myself. My name's Jake Willey. I'm a principal game designer at Sumo Sheffield. I joined back in 2016 as a wee intern fresh out of university, and I've been here ever since. I brought the boom on Crackdown 3. I helped stitch Sackboy together for his big adventure. And for the past few years, to be honest, I've been working on some really cool projects, but unfortunately unannounced projects, so I can't talk about them here today. But honestly, it's great to be here giving a talk because everything that I'm going to be talking about today is stuff that I've learned on the job whilst working at Sumo, so it feels like a massive full circle moment to be able to stand up here, well, sit here, and really share my experience and knowledge with everybody that's listening in today. So, yeah, massively privileged, and the opportunity is great, so thank you for this. So yeah, we all want to make something awesome, right? That's the simplest motivation why any of us clock in the mornings. It's why we're all here. It's why we all do our jobs. And my talk today is going to be focusing on how we do this together. More specifically, it's how we do the process of thinking, doing, and reviewing together. And the key takeaways are going to be how to maximize ideation through brainstorms, how to fail fast through the rapid iteration cycle, how to empower the team to confidently share feedback, and how to maintain strong communications within your team. So just to go over that again real quick, brainstorming, iteration, feedback, and communication. So we'll kick off with brainstorms. And to get us started, I want to introduce you all to Dave. This is Dave, my assistant. Say hi, Dave. Dave's got a design problem. Oh no, he's got no idea how to solve it either. He's spent a lot of time lately thinking about his problem. After all, the first step towards finding a solution is really trying to understand the problem in the first place. So he spent some time thinking about his goals. What's he trying to achieve? Why is he trying to achieve it? Of those goals, what's his highest priority? You know, which bits should he be prioritizing first? Are there any parts of the problem that he could afford to ignore at this point? He thinks about any examples that might exist out there in the wild that can sort of help him figure out his problem. And he also thinks about cake because he skipped lunch today. So this is a quote that he remembered as well. Have a great idea, have a lot of them. And this is a quote from Thomas Edison, who was the world's first electrician, to put it lightly. And to paraphrase this a little bit, and to add to this, great ideas can come from anywhere or anyone. And this was said by me, literally just this second. You know, I'm not really a believer in the notion of an ideas person. Everybody that's got a brain is an ideas person, you know? So there is no such thing as the person that has the ideas, because everybody has ideas. Ironically, though, that line of thinking gives Dave an idea. He really wants to run a brainstorm, you know? He's got a problem, needs to solve it, don't know how to solve it, so he's going to run a brainstorm. That's Dave's thinking. Luckily for us, Dave's a pro at brainstorm, so he's going to show us how it's done. Yeah, let's do a brainstorm. Go on, Dave, let's do it. So, to begin with, Dave asks for help. He rallies the troops, he reaches out to his team to ask for help solving his problem. After all, the best way to gather a bunch of ideas is to get a lot of brains together in the same room. The key thing to note here as well, though, is that the team that Dave has pulled together is a multi-disciplinary team as well. You know, it's not just a gaggle of fellow designers. It's a group of people from across the project that have got all sorts of different experiences. Artists, audio folk, programmers, production, QA, etc. It's a mixed bag of people. He asks them for help. They oblige because they're awesome. So he gets on to the next step, which is explaining the problem. You know, he gets the team together, he really explains his goals that he's after, he talks about his priorities and lets them know what's the most important things. And he also gets some examples in the room as well to get people thinking and help everybody align and figure out, you know, are there any examples out there that they can think about that help them think through the line of thinking for the problems that they're trying to solve. So next step is Dave takes the step back. You know, he's gathered everybody together. He knows what he's trying to figure out, but he had no ideas in the first place. So for this particular instance, he is just there to facilitate the brainstorm, you know. He wants the team to get stuck in and really think about ideas and try and help figure out some solutions for the stuff. You know, he can always add to the pile. He can think about ideas of his own, but realistically, what Dave's trying to do here is make sure that everybody's aligned and really let the team run with it and think of ideas and solutions for his problems. After the brainstorm's done and loads of ideas have been thrown at the table, Dave takes it offline. He sits there, he looks at all the various ideas that were put forward, and he really takes the time out to consider whether or not the ideas that were put forward can help solve his problem that he had in the first place. And to do this, he follows a process known as how, now, wow. And the process works like this. Start off by drawing a 2x2 grid. The x-axis represents the originality of an idea, whilst the y-axis represents how easy it is to implement. You take the ideas from your brainstorm that have some potential and you sort them into one of the three categories: how, now, or wow. Now ideas are low-hanging fruit and solutions that are really low risk. Might even have some examples that exist out there in the wild that you can use as like immediate reference. How ideas are some ideas that, you know, they're likely to have a huge amount of impact, but for the time that you've got, or maybe the particular point in development that you're at, super challenging to create. You know, maybe the tech doesn't exist for it yet, or they just take too much time to deliver. So they're fantastic ideas, but the ones that you kind of can't action right this second. And then lastly, you've got your wow ideas, and these are your silver bullets. These are the ideas that are absolutely fantastic, bang for buck ideas, and the things that you could probably action really quickly. You know, they're super original, easy to implement. They really have that wow factor, which is why they fall into that wow category. And, you know, by following this process of filtering things into how, now, or wow, it allows you to really quickly prioritize a list of all the various ideas that you've got from your brainstorm and try and create a real nice sort of action plan for where to go next. And beautifully, what it kind of gives you as well is it gives you the opportunity to look at things that you can do right away, but also have a nice backlog of ideas through that how section and really think about, you know, things that you can do in the future that are fantastic ideas. You just can't do them right now. So it's a real nice way of kind of moving things forward in the immediate, but also giving yourself things to look back on in the future. And an example of this, where this exact process has worked really well for me in the past, is when I was working on Crackdown 3, after the main game shipped, we moved on to doing a couple of DLC packs. And during development of the main game, we all talked about some fantastic ideas, like bringing back the wingsuit from Crackdown 2 that everybody loved, or some additional gadgets that just never quite made it into the pan because we just had too little time on our hands to do stuff. But the beauty of that is because we had a bunch of these how ideas already sat in that bucket waiting for us, when it came to doing the DLC, we could really look back and immediately sort of go like, ooh, there's some great ideas there. Why don't we do those now? We've got the time to do it. Amazing. And that how section gave us the ability to really springboard and just save time really quickly. I think one of the first DLC packs we made, I think we developed it in like 6 weeks, which is mad. But the only reason we did that is because we had the ideas there from the off. So all we had to do was make the thing, right? And that how now wow process made that easy for us because we were able to do stuff that we'd not had the chance to do while we were developing the main game. And, you know, yeah, it's just a really good process, and it's one that I've used literally in the past to work on stuff, which is really cool. So just a few example brainstorm techniques to talk about, because, you know, Dave's done a great job of showing us how to do a brainstorm in his particular way, but I want to talk a little bit more about some examples that I like to use. So first one I'll talk about is word association. So this is where you basically take a keyword or a phrase and you use that as a launch pad for conversation. And for example, if I was to sit in a room and say the word jungle, that might already spark some ideas in your head about different things. You know, you might think of environments that are tied to jungles, like, you know, humidity, loads of foliage, potentially things like river rapids and stuff like that. Or you might think about monkeys swinging from vines from trees to trees, or, you know, whatever else comes to your mind when you think of the word jungle. The point is, everybody might think of something different, and just having a singular anchor point that everybody can think about as a starting point means that you can generate a bunch of different ideas around a particular context very quickly through word association, and it's a really good example of a way of generating things quickly. The next one is mind mapping, and this is a visual brainstorming technique where you have a specific topic or initial idea, and then that's kind of used as an anchor point to literally draw new ideas from. And you almost end up with this, it's called a mind map for a reason, you almost end up with this map of ideas that have grown from a particular point, and every idea connects to another idea, to another idea, to another one. And it's a really nice way of connecting tangents and ideas together to really kind of create a very, very quick, rapid, almost snowball effect of ideas. So it's quite different to word association, but still ends up with you generating a lot of ideas really quickly. And then the next one is called sticky note storming, and this is my personal favorite brainstorming technique. It's one that I do basically all the time. Anybody that's worked with me and seen me do a brainstorm, this is the one that I always fall back on. And the reason for that is it empowers basically anybody, dependent, regardless of their confidence levels, to kind of put ideas forward. Because what sticky note storming does for you is it drops the necessity to have to speak your ideas out loud, which not everybody's comfortable with. It's a way of being able to write ideas down literally on a sticky note, or if you're doing it virtually on a Miro or whiteboard or whatever it might be, and organize ideas down underneath specific themes or categories. And there's a running theme here, which I'll talk about in a second, but the idea is with sticky note storming is you'll have predefined headers that will be related to particular topics, and you'll spend a little bit of time on each one, writing ideas down on a sticky note, putting them underneath the relevant header, and then maybe have a bit of time afterwards to discuss the various ideas, but the actual ideation part is done completely independently and written rather than spoken. So this is the idea that this is the one I like to do, because as I say, it kind of allows everybody in the room to confidently put their ideas forward, even if they don't feel confident talking about them in a room full of people, which is really nice. So to just wrap up on brainstorms really quick, some tips on this. Open the door to other disciplines. Dave did it. As I say, he was a pro at Brainstorm, so he did it. He got everybody from different disciplines involved, and it's something you should do too, you know? Everybody has the opportunity to offer an idea, so you should try and do as much as you can to open the door to other disciplines, you know? Get designers in there, get artists, programmers, producers, whoever. Everybody's got an idea that they can give, so open the door to people. Making sure that everybody in the room actually understands what the goal of the brainstorm is in the first place is an absolute must. And it's the only way you can really have a successful brainstorm, is making sure everybody knows what you're trying to think about ideas for, and high level goals are the way to do that. You know, lead the session with why you're doing it and what you're trying to achieve. Never really say no in a brainstorm. You know, you're not there to problem solve, you're not there to workshop ideas, you're there to create and generate as many ideas as you can. So if somebody puts an idea forward, don't be that person that tells them it's a bad idea. Just the process is to create ideas, not to judge ideas. So never really say no in a brainstorm. And the point of that is action afterwards, not during. You know, you shouldn't be going into a brainstorm thinking we need to come out of this session knowing exactly what the action plan is. That can come next. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means in terms of consideration and stuff as we move through this talk. But, you know, you should never feel obliged to try and come up with the solutions and then decide on them also in the same session. That's not what a brainstorm's there for. So always try and action afterwards rather than during the session. Which brings me on to iteration. Innovation comes from long-term thinking and iterative execution. And this is a quote from Reid Hoffman, who, amongst many other things, was the co-founder of LinkedIn. To paraphrase it a little bit, the path to greatness is made of several small steps. And if we visualize that, effective iteration gets you from something good to something awesome by taking many, many small steps. Sometimes the steps are going upwards, sometimes they might take a step backwards, but the idea is many, many small steps means that you can get from something good to something awesome, but check yourself every single step of the way. And what I want to talk about specifically is how you do that process quickly. And that's through something known as the rapid iteration cycle. Now, this is assuming that you've already developed something far enough to a point that you're able to review it in some capacity. You do this with other people, as this allows you to gather feedback. You generate feedback, compiling it all somewhere that's easily accessible so that you can come back to it later and consider it. You take the time out to consider the feedback that you've received. You know, is it relevant? Would actioning it make the thing that you're working on better or worse? You know, is the feedback something that you want to address? How are you going to do it? Is it a priority right this second, etc.? There's all sorts of things that you need to consider with feedback, and there's a time that you should actually dedicate a proper process to considering what feedback you actually received and what you're going to do with it next. And then only once you've considered all that feedback should you actually action anything. You know, this is the point where the actual iteration takes place, but it comes, as I say, after that very thought out, considered process step that comes before it. And then you go back to reviewing. It's, you know, as the cycle suggests, it's a very, very repetitive process, this, you know, it's very quickly iterated and actioned over and over again, repeatedly. So, you know, you review to gather feedback, you feedback to analyze your progress, you consider things to generate action points, and then you actually action those action points to make progress. And that's the process in a nutshell. Back when I was working on Crackdown 3, I was a level designer at the time, and we had a load of content in the world that we needed to build and iterate on quickly. Pretty much every single one of the icons on this map image that I've got up on the screen now was a piece of content. The game was absolutely massive. And that rapid iteration process actually saved us in terms of creating all this content almost simultaneously. Because what it allowed us to do was kind of make things, assess it, consider the feedback that we've got, take action points, and then go back to reviewing and kind of follow that process over and over and over again for all this various bits of content in the game. You know, are you able to action everything that you want from a feedback loop? No. There's, you know, not everybody has the time to do that. I'm sure we've all worked on something where there was a little bit of feedback that we really wanted to address but didn't quite get the time for. That's totally fine. This was another example of that. But did the process of rapid iteration improve the content that I was working on? 110%. Yeah, absolutely. You know, without that process of reviewing, feeding back, considering the action points, taking action and going back to reviewing again, never would have delivered this game, really, to be candid. So yeah, it was a really good process that, is, you know, as I say, is a personal experience can pull from, as something that I've worked on in the past, and yeah, just advocate for that process a lot. And as I've already mentioned, iteration is an ongoing cycle. You know, you might not get the iteration right on the first cycle, so running it as rapidly as you can, getting people involved as quickly and as often as possible, means that, you know, even if it takes 5-10 cycles or whatever, you should expect to spend and run through this cycle a lot on individual pieces of content. And the point of the process is to try and execute it as quickly and as often as you can, so that your ideas can grow quickly. That's why it's called rapid iteration. But why is that important? Well, failing to review regularly restricts the feedback that you get. Restricted feedback means you kind of have to limit the amount of consideration you can put into something. Limited consideration leads to thoughtless action, or blind action is another word for it. And thoughtless action poses a risk to quality. And ultimately, we want the games that we're working on to be as high quality as possible. And failing to follow the steps that I've talked about here, with, you know, really taking the time to think things through because you've got feedback from playing the game regularly and reviewing regularly, means that you are literally posing a risk to the quality of the product that you're working on, which goes against everything that we stand for here. So yeah, some top tips for iteration. For reviewing, do it in the context of the actual thing that you're looking at. You know, try and, if you're working on a new weapon for a multiplayer shooter, for example, only ever testing it in single player in a firing range, probably not the best way to get the feedback that you're after and really review the thing. So trying to do it in the right situation as often as you can do is super important. And it's also imperative that you do that as much as you can individually, but also as a team. You know, be in a room with other people, physically, virtually, however you want to do it. But make sure that you're actually having these reviews with other people as well as just yourself, because that's super important for collaboration. For feedback, you know, you should always be generating your own anyway, but ask for it from other people. You know, if there's something that you're working on, or, you know, even if it's just feedback that you have and you want to see if other people feel the same way, you know, talk to people. It's the best way to get the conversation going and get that feedback generated. And this directly ties into consideration, but don't knee-jerk things. You know, if you've got feedback that's come in from a playtest, I've been culpable of this myself in the past. You know, if you have a playtest at 11, don't push a change at 1 o'clock that's going to action some feedback unless it's absolutely considered as like oh no, that's a known thing, we know it's definitely right. But don't knee-jerk otherwise, you know. Make sure you take the time to really think about the feedback that you're getting before you actually spring to any action, which literally leads me on to consideration. You know, when you've got feedback come in and you're thinking about the things that you want to do next, looking at that feedback and considering it all against things like the goals and the pillars of the game, the feature that you're working on, etc., the overall intent in the first place. You know, if something you were working on was supposed to scare people and they felt scared but didn't like feeling scared, it's probably not the worst thing in the world, because you still wanted them to feel scared. It's, you know, sad for them that they didn't enjoy that, but at the same time, you wanted them to feel scared and they did. So is that feedback negative? Not necessarily. And that's why you should always consider about the intent of the thing that you were working on when you've got feedback as well. Again, the priorities goes without saying, but, you know, if something's a low priority bit of feedback, but is still something you want to action, you just need to be mindful of whether now's the right time to take that action or not. And also try and be as forward thinking as you can. You know, think about, if I action this bit of feedback that I've got, what does that mean for all the other areas of the game, or what other problems could this potentially cause, etc. Like, try and predict the thing that will happen if you do the change that you're considering making before you make the change. And it goes without saying, as I say, but only action the thing actually after you've considered it. And then lastly, just inform the team as well. You know, like, if people have been kind enough to sort of give you the time to provide feedback in the first place and really get involved with something, just sending out a quick email or a message or a weekly show and tell update as to what the changes that you're going to make are based on the latest round of iteration. It's just a nice way to kind of keep everybody in the loop and just sort of bookend the process a little bit, really, and just build that faith and that trust that, you know, you are listening, things are moving forward, and you kind of taking everybody on the ride with you, really. So yeah, that's iteration, and that's that section sort of out of the way. So let's drill a bit deeper specifically into feedback. And for this one, I want to tell you a little bit of a story. So this is a chap called, I can't say his name now, William Edwards Deming. And he was an engineer, economist, management consultant, probably made a mean sandwich. He did all sorts of stuff. He was a very, very busy man. But more specifically, the reason I'm talking about him today is he was an expert in quality control. And he believed in a rather particular methodology when it came to giving feedback and maintaining levels of high quality. And it was known as something as is called total quality control. That's a phrase you might have heard it referred to in the past. But another phrase that was used to sort of describe this methodology was just-in-time manufacturing. And the essence of it is basically finding and fixing problems is everyone's responsibility. And it basically means that, in short, everybody regardless of their seniority is responsible for finding problems, calling them out and working to resolve them. And, you know, to paraphrase it a little bit again, everyone should feel empowered to provide feedback. And why is this important? Well, going back to Mr. Deming for a second, in 1951, at the request of the US Army, he was sent to Asia to aid in the reconstruction efforts after World War II. And this resulted in him spending a load of time in Japan. And during his time there, he met and taught a bunch of engineers, managers, scholars, etc., all of his theories about maximizing productivity. And one of those people was a chap called Akira Morita. I've probably butchered his name pronunciation there. I do apologize. But he was the co-founder of Sony Corporation. And so, as you can see, this Mr. Deming's had some run-ins with some particularly profound and experienced people in the field, really. So this is a photo from one of Deming's visits to the Toyota manufacturing site in Japan. And it was one of the many companies that Deming visited while he was in the country. And he actually instilled his principles of total quality control while he was here. And what he did was he gave every single worker on the assembly line basically a pull cord that would halt production entirely if they spotted a fault at any point in production. Previous to this, they would wait for the car to be built, put at the end of the production line, and then quality control would take place. But by that point, the issue was already there, so actually actioning the thing was kind of harder because there was no way to really sort of solve it before it got too far along in production. So by giving everybody along the line a pull cord, it meant that you could find and fix problems before it got too far down the line. And it gave everybody that trust and that empowerment to really scrutinize the quality of the products that they were working on. And this approach, and ultimately in the end Toyota's approach, gave ownership and responsibility for the product's quality to those closest to its creation. And this is a direct pull-through of a quote from a chap called Ed Catmull in his book Creativity Inc., one of the co-founders of Pixar. It's a really good book about working together and creative problem-solving and all that kind of stuff. Highly recommend it as a book. But he talks about this directly in that book. And as I say, it's about giving that responsibility for a product's quality to those closest to the creation of the thing in the first place, which again literally falls back to that thing I mentioned a second ago, where everybody should feel that empowerment to provide the feedback. At the end of the day, we're all here to make something awesome, so who's better to critique our work than ourselves, right? And a process that we've started using on my current project to kind of fulfill this sort of mentality is we've actually started using shared feedback boards on Miro, where we have different areas of the games with their own dedicated spaces. And we invite the entire team to leave their feedback on them, whether it's anonymous or whether it's named, completely up to the individual given the feedback. But the idea is we put the onus on the team to generate feedback as often as possible. And it gives everyone a chance to just have their thoughts heard and, again, scrutinize the thing that they're working on because we're the closest to it. And what happens after that is feature owners and leads will then take that feedback, distill it down, and write it all out on Confluence later. And then this will be the point at which the consideration part of the rapid iteration loop literally takes place. And basically what this means is there's time spent looking at all the feedback that's been gathered by the team, and the feature owners and the leads will go away and consider that feedback afterwards and consider, is there stuff here that we want to action? What can we do about improving this thing based on the feedback that the team's given? And it just encourages everybody to seek that continuous improvement, not only on their own area of the game, but on the project as a whole. And it just keeps things moving, which is really nice. And, we still maintain things like open door policies if there's more direct feedback that wants to be given, or if somebody's in a playtest and they want to say something out loud while we're playing. Like, none of that goes away with this process. It's just, this gives everybody a chance to asynchronously leave feedback and really make sure that, there is no wrong way to give feedback, basically. It just kind of gives everybody the opportunity to put their thoughts down somewhere and make sure that their voice can be heard, even if they don't want to give it as directly as some others may. And it's just a really nice way of kind of making sure that everybody in the team has a chance to get their voices heard. So yeah, just wanted to share that with you because that's a process that we're doing at the minute on my current project, and it's working really nicely for us. So some tips for giving feedback. It goes without saying, but be as concise as you can. There's nothing worse than vague feedback. I'm sure everybody in the room's had feedback given to them at some point, which is either long-winded waffle or it's full of jargon. So trying to be as concise as you can, and more importantly, giving context, explaining why you're giving that feedback. Super important in terms of letting the person you're giving the feedback to actually understand in the first place. try and detach your personal preferences from it as well. You know, you might not be the person that this thing that you're reviewing is being made for, so you've got to try and look at the thing through the lens of the target audience and detach your own personal preferences from it. Of course, sometimes that personal preference can still be useful when it comes to giving feedback, but you've always got to try and remember that you're not necessarily the intended audience, so try and really detach your personal preference from that thing as much as you can, unless it's got a relevance to it when you're giving that feedback. Balancing the feedback with positive and negative. I'm not talking about necessarily like the bad sandwich technique, but it's more about emphasizing the importance of how you give that feedback. You know, even if you're talking about something that, or you're giving feedback that is somewhat negative, you're not, you know, you maybe critiquing something a little bit, at least just thanking somebody for the effort that they've put in, or acknowledging the fact that, you know, you might not be singing from the same hymn sheet as them, and just trying to come across positively while actually giving negative feedback is super important, because that can help individuals receiving negative feedback leaving the conversation feeling frustrated and disheartened. You know, it can kind of try and make the conversation just a little bit more lighter and engaged in discussion, as opposed to just like the individual getting defensive, or, you know, the conversation taking a negative route. And also just pick the right moment for it. You know, we're all busy people. This is a busy job. And sometimes giving the feedback in that specific moment isn't the right time. So just try and be mindful of things. You know, if it's a particularly busy project at the moment, or maybe that individual, you know, is working, spinning a load of plates or whatever, trying to pick the right time to give the feedback's good. And that's why we do things like the Miro board, because, you know, if you don't have the time, or the individual that you want to give feedback to doesn't have the time to listen to feedback immediately in the moment, that asynchronous method of using Miro is a nice way to still get the feedback across, but it doesn't immediately throw something onto somebody's brain and make them have to do a context switch right in the moment and pull them out of whatever it is that they were focusing on. So just try and pick the right times to give you feedback, basically. Some quick tips for receiving feedback. I already mentioned this a second ago, but ask for it. You know, the best way to get feedback from people is to just ask for it in the first place. I've already said this as well, but consider it all before you action anything. Be very appreciative of the feedback that people do give you. You know, sometimes you don't realize that people giving you feedback is actually them offering themselves forward to you, and you've got to really be appreciative of that. You know, not everybody does that very well, and sometimes, you know, if you don't thank people for taking the time out to actually give their feedback, they might stop giving it to you. You know, so try and appreciate the efforts that people go to actually get their thoughts across to you in the first place. You know, it's they don't have to, basically, so be appreciative when they do. Try and understand the source as well. You know, think about the person that's giving you the feedback. I mentioned a second ago, you know, when you're giving feedback, you might not be the right audience, but equally when you're receiving feedback, that person may or may not also be the right audience. So, you know, try and understand where the feedback's coming from and who the person is that's giving it to you. And also try not to take it personally. You know, everybody's passionate in this job. That's why we're all here. But your work is not a reflection of you as an individual, so critiques on your work shouldn't be taken as a personal attack. So try not to get defensive, try not to, you know, try and take it too personally. It's not always easy, I know, but just particularly when feedback's negative as well, just try and see it as an opportunity to learn and improve, as opposed to being like a threat or criticism of you as an individual. That's not what we're here for. It's not why the feedback's being given in the first place. So just try and think about that and try not to take it too personally. So last section we'll talk about is communication. Creativity may be hard to nurture, but it's easy to thwart. And this is a quote by Adam Grant, who is a best-selling author. And a quick Google will basically tell you that the most common reason that teams fail is down to pure communication. You know, as I say, any quick Google, top 10 list of why teams fail, poor communications, slap bang at the top of each list usually. And why is that? Well, when communication breaks down, the biggest issue that comes out of that is a lack of vision. You know, people might interpret goals differently. They might actually, you know, completely get a muddied view of what's expected of them. And that lack of vision can just directly lead to some sort of lowered confidence in the team. You know, if teams aren't aligned and people aren't singing from the same hymn sheet, then that can actually just lead to a direct lack of confidence in something, whether it's the specifics of an idea, whether it's a team member, whether it's the team in general, whether it's the project in general. You know, if a team doesn't understand what it is they're actually trying to achieve, then they probably won't feel confident enough to actually make decisions and act on them. And if they don't feel confident to make decisions, then they won't feel empowered. You know, they won't actually have the empowerment to actually create or do anything. An unconfident team can't be empowered because they don't have the confidence to do so. If the team's not confident and they're not empowered, then you know, they don't feel empowered to make the decisions, that can often foster a lack of trust between teams. In worst case scenarios, it can leave a team feeling like they're reserved to a service role of some sort, and it makes them unable to sort of have their voices heard. And ultimately, all of this culminates in a lack of progress, which is, it can be a project killer if it's left untamed for too long. So how do we solve it? Well, when it comes to communication, there's 3 main steps. Starting the conversation, keeping it going, and wrapping things up. First off, we'll talk about starting the conversation, and more specifically, we'll talk about leading with intent. So, remember Dave from earlier? He's back again. You all right, Dave? Yeah, he's not doing too bad. Oh, hang on. No, he's got another problem.
You're joking. Not another one?
Yeah, I know. He's got another one, love. Anyway, so this time around, he's organised a meeting with the team because they're all wanting to start work on a new feature. And in this example, he's already drafted a solution of his own, and he's used that as the basis for the discussion in the kickoff with the rest of the team. But because he's done that, he's immediately met with questions from the feature team, quite rightfully as well, which just leads to the conversation focusing around problem solving, edge cases around the specifics of the solution. There might be some misunderstanding that takes some time to get right, and ultimately that just leads to a lack of progress, and the feature team might, in worst case scenarios, just completely feel excluded, and like they're not a part of the conversation to begin with. They're just reserved to that service role. They're just there to fulfill the solution and nothing else, which is terrible for collaboration, really. So what we need to do to solve that is to lead with intent, and I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically around what intent is, just so that everybody's on the same page of what I mean when I talk about intent. So this is Kratos from God of War. He's one of gaming's most iconic characters, and he's iconic for a number of reasons as well. But a lot of it's down to his character design, David Jaffe, who was the creator of God of War initially, he told Charlie Wen, he was the artist responsible for creating Kratos, that he wanted a character who looked brutal, didn't resemble a traditional Greek hero, and was individualistic. And that, in its simplest form, is intent. He gave Wen a series of defined goals to try and work towards. Sometimes, though, intent isn't always a silver bullet, because knowing your goals doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get it right first time. And an example here is that when Wen did go away with that intent and create some initial designs for Kratos, didn't quite live up to his expectations. And you can see, if you're familiar with Kratos, or the image that I just shared on the previous screen, none of these characters on this screen look like Kratos, but these were the initial designs that Charlie Wen came up with. So what Jaff did in this scenario was he actually clarified his intent even more to really try and nail it in terms of what he was looking for. And what he actually wanted was specifically the word ferocity from Kratos. So what Wen did is he gradually removed armor piece by piece from Kratos to try and give that ferocity. And he did this by taking some inspiration from a film that had been seen recently. And ultimately that landed at the design of Kratos that we all know today. And that clarification of the intent just meant that there was incremental steps taken to get to where it needed to be. And you could consider this as an example of that rapid iteration cycle as well, again, in practice, really, which is really cool to see. And another cool fact is this first ever image of Kratos was actually drawn on a napkin, and I think that's awesome, and it makes me very jealous because I wish I could draw, and then there's people out there like Charlie Wen who can make this look this awesome on a napkin. So yeah, definitely not jealous at all on that. But anyway, let's go back to Dave. So Dave's learned everything that I've just said about it leading with intent, and he starts off another conversation with the rest of his feature team, and he does this, as I say, by talking about his intent first. He uses that as the launch point in the conversation with the team, opens the floor for Q&A, and makes sure that everybody understands what the intent is, they're all aligned on the goals, and they understand why Dave's trying to do what he's trying to do. And then, because everybody understands what they're all trying to do together and why they're trying to achieve it, the team actually then works together on figuring out those solutions together. How are they going to solve Dave's problem? In short, Dave engaged his team, He made sure that everybody got together, understood things, knew where they were headed, and they're now all working together.
What is that? What am I talking about here, people? Synergy.
Pure cheese. I regret putting that in immediately. Never mind. Anyway, but this goes back to what I said earlier on, right? Great ideas can come from anywhere or anyone, and it's not a single individual's responsibility to find solutions to problems. I'm a designer, and there might be other designers listening to this. Sometimes you can feel like it's your responsibility to come up with the ideas or the solutions. It's not the case, everybody's here to offer things and try and push things forward, right? So working together as a team as often as you can to find the right solutions is the thing that we should all be gunning for. It's no individual's responsibility to figure everything out, right? So that's intent for starting the conversation anyway. So let's talk about how you actually then stay connected and keep that conversation going. So I'm going to only touch on this lightly because realistically, people will be doing this already, but it's just nice to just have a little bit of a refresher on just some techniques and stuff and some top tips for individuals. So we'll talk about day-to-day comms, week-on-week comms, and then some collaborative review stuff as well. So for day-to-days, just some examples of how I like to keep in touch with the teams that I've worked with over the years. So having Teams chats and Miro spaces that are shared by a feature team or, a design team or however it might be, just to share progress and ask questions is a really good way to sort of stay in touch and ensure that everyone has a means of staying in touch day on day. As I say, sharing that progress, even if it's something very, very small, it's just a slight bit of iteration or something, just day to day, if you've got a chat going or whatever, just share the progress, if it's a quick video, screenshot, etc. Just dropping something into a chat's a really nice way to kind of keep conversations going or maybe spark new conversations and stuff, but just make sure that everybody's in the loop and kind of kept up to speed with things. Again, asking for feedback, it's a really good practice that if you've got something that you've shared progress on or somebody else has shared progress on, giving feedback, asking for feedback, like day-to-day comms is really where you should be trying to do this as often as you can and kind of make sure that people feel empowered on the daily to kind of provide feedback where they can. And lead by example as well, like whether you're the lead or the feature owner or a participant that's actively involved in the thing that's being worked on or discussed, etc. If a conversation's gone quiet, it's kind of your job to turn up the volume and make sure that people feel like they can keep the conversation going day to day. So just try and lead by example where you can, if you feel like things are taking a bit of a quiet turn or they're not being talked about maybe as much as they could, lead by example and try and set the precedent yourself, and just try and do the right thing yourself and hopefully others will follow. For week on week, specifically for things like playtesting and reviewing, team show and tells is something that I'm sure a lot of people will do already, but it's something that I try and make sure that every one of the teams I work with does. And this is basically just an opportunity once a week where everybody can get together in the team and just basically look at things that are in progress. We have my project one every Friday where we actually look at the entire project as a whole, but then I try and do a similar thing with specific feature strike teams that I'm working with as well, just to kind of give visibility on the more incremental stuff and the sort of lower level iteration of things and how things are going. And it also gives the team a bit of a chance to also kind of like align and ask any new questions or, just sort of, again, provide feedback in the middle of a show and tell and stuff is always a good way to do it. It's just a great way to celebrate individual efforts as well, which goes a long way to boosting morale within a team and celebrating the efforts that each individual member of a team's making to the overall product. Play the game together. Again, whether it's a multiplayer game that you can literally play together or it's a single player game that you can play at the same time as somebody else, like playing the game together is just a great way of not only strengthening your working relationships with your peers, but also just in terms of just understanding where the product's at and where things are going. It's just a great way to kind of keep your head in firmly in what you're working on and just kind of make sure that you're sort of in touch with the people that you're building the game with in the first place. And then collaborative reviews as well, like, focusing on a specific thing, really drilling into it together as a team and just giving it a little bit more scrutiny than you maybe would during like wider play tests or reviews, etc. It's just a really nice way for a team to really get together and keep their communication going. And we do this a lot on my current project as well, where we'll have a specific time allocated to review a specific thing and we'll drill into it. There's an agenda point that we're going to look at and we'll spend ages looking at that one thing, talking about it, generating feedback and stuff. And typically once a week, it's something that we like to do a lot of. And it works really well. So for communication, to summarize really quickly, lead the conversation with what, again, is that intent. What are you trying to achieve? Align on why you're trying to achieve it. Make sure everybody understands the why behind the thing. Collectively figure out how. It's no individual's responsibility to come up with the solution. Do that together. Work together as a group. Talk to each other on the daily. Review and play together weekly. And then review and play it on your own daily as well, Like, communication's all about talking to other people, but you should always... It sounds really stupid, be talking to yourself as well. Like, try and make sure that you understand where your own brain's at with things is a good thing, a good habit to get into, because it helps you better communicate with other people if you understand yourself and what you're actually thinking yourself a lot more by reviewing and playing the game as often as you can on the daily, if possible. So let's wrap things up, shall we? What is creative collaboration? And I mentioned at the start, it's the process of thinking, doing, and reviewing. And most importantly, it's that process of doing this together. I've talked about how you can think together through brainstorms, generate a ton of ideas in a short amount of time, and use the how, now, wow technique to filter through them. Talked about rapid iteration as an effective method of doing, working together to quickly move something forward as a team by following that cycle of review, feedback, consider, and action to make progress. I talked about how empowering your team to give feedback is an effective method of constantly reviewing things collaboratively. And I also talked about how maintaining strong communication throughout this entire process is absolutely vital if you want to succeed. I hope you've learned something today, and I'm sure that combining all of this with the raw talent that's on display in this company, I've got no doubts that we'll all continue making something awesome for many, many years to come. So yeah, thank you. Any questions?